or silver.
Yeah, any of the precious
How much
metals.
foreign influence is perhaps in the, if you go back to the banks of the Jackson era, several times, one of the things that killed off the banks in that era was Congress passed laws. Thomas Hart Benton, a very famous senator from Missouri, he pushed through the House and Senate measures seeing who was investing in that Bank of the United States and found that a lot of the money was from Europe and so on and so forth. They were regulating monetary policy, not quite like the Fed does today. I mean, I don't want to get into all those details, but it was different. But just think, I mean, we have fiscal policy and monetary policy in this country. And monetary policy, we the people have no control over. That's interest rates, flood of money, printing of money.
Right. I mean, right now we're in QE, infinity they're saying, right?
Yeah.
Where we're just going to turn on the printing presses and let them go until we feel like we've done what we need to do.
While the QE stands for quantitative easing, basically it's the switch to turn on the presses and start kicking out money.
And if you look throughout history, I mean, if you look through what happened to the Continental dollar in the Revolutionary War, what happened to the Confederate money in the Civil War, printing money at some point, the value will decrease to the point where the money, that we're going to have runaway inflation. It's not possible to print and borrow this, because this is one thing the Federal Reserve did. It allowed the government to deficit spend like never before. And ever since then, the national debt has,
Balloon.
slowly increased ever since.
Inflated.
Right, because the dollar, at least even when the Federal Reserve began back in 1913, was tied to gold. You had to have gold to back up the dollars that were being printed.
Right.
And then we came off of the gold standard.
Under the New Deal.
Under the New Deal, and we all of a sudden have fractional reserve banking, where it allows you to print as much as you want based on, promissory notes and good graces and whatever else they can come up with to say, well, yeah, we're good for it.
Yeah, and that's something too that if you look back at like the Jackson era, Jackson wanted all transactions in gold and silver. He wanted, it was called specie then. You want no paper money because of War of 1812, what had happened there. And we have sort of, we kind of went back and forth throughout the 1900s with that. But again, 1913, all of a sudden, wham, we need something, we want to get into a war or something, let's print the money to pay for it. Other country wants to borrow money for their war stuff, sure, we'll sign an IOU.
And it is important for people to realize that every dollar that is printed depreciates every dollar already out there.
Yeah.
It makes it worth less.
Exactly. I would think of the most expensive baseball card, that the Honus Wagner.
Yeah, the
right?
tobacco card.
Yeah, the tobacco card. Imagine if all of a sudden somebody found a hidden, vault full of 100,000 of those cards. How much would that card be worth all of a sudden?
Right. It would the value would drop to an insignificant portion of what it is today.
Exactly. And so I want to go back to what you were talking about with how with the early banks, they were wondering, well, who's investing in the bank? Well, we still have foreign interests, or so it's rumored, because nobody really knows who owns the Fed, investing in the Fed. But then the Fed turns around and they fund things like the World Bank and the Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund.
And take it to the 2008 bailout. I mean, if you want to bring it into today's world, we still don't know where that $700 billion of money we didn't have, but we had to borrow the money, we didn't have it. The Fed won't tell us. So they've dragged Ben Bernanke under oath. He won't say where the money went. And some people have tried to do legislation. I'm trying to think of the guy's name from Virginia, or Vermont, Bernie Sanders. He tried to push through in the Senate a piece of legislation demanding that Bernanke come and tell everybody where their money goes, and the Senate won't take up the bill. That was in 2009.
Yeah.
And Bernanke's answer, well, it went to banks. went to stuff in Europe. And doesn't
Yeah.
have to. He does not have to tell the American people where their money went.
No, we're continually loaning money to foreign interests through the Fed, and we don't have any accounting of it.
Well, that's depressing. That's
Yeah.
just depressing. I'll tell you, there are other things that happened. If you go from 1913 forward, that have to do with the growth of the federal government and what the government can and can't do. Prohibition, another interesting thing of
Yeah.
that era, which was the Volstead Act, which was the providing of funds that accompanied that, outlawing drinking. I don't think that worked too well either.
Well, and it's interesting, Volstead was a congressman from Minnesota.
Oh, gee. I wasn't going to mention that, but
I think he was from Granite Falls.
I'll never drive through Granite Falls again without thinking of that's the guy who tried to take away my booze. But and also during you talk about government growing. One of the things that happened during World War I were they brought back the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Yeah.
And imprisoned anyone who they set up something called the Creel Committee, a guy named George Creel, to sell World War I, and they eliminated. I mean, I'm of German descent. They eliminated all German words from the American language. Hamburger was called Liberty Sausage. Sauerkraut you couldn't say, that was called Liberty Cabbage. I mean, you talk about overarching government.
That's like freedom fries.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but I mean, people complain today about what's going on. You talk about then. I mean,
Yeah.
to people were imprisoned. Eugene Debs, who ran for president, I'm no fan of him. He was a socialist, but he got 10 years in jail for speaking. President Harding commuted his sentence, but served 3 years just for opposing World War I and speaking out.
Well, Wilson threw how many Germans into concentration camps here in America? And not Germans from Germany, American Germans. And FDR did it again with Japanese during the Second World War. Does anybody, I mean, a few people know that obviously, but how many people are aware that we had our own camps here in this country for citizens of this country?
Right.
Yeah, and I would say too, the growth of government slowed down quite a bit in the 20s. We got back to normalcy,
Yeah.
which was the term. But of course, the 1930s changed that as well. And of course, government, as always, had a crisis, used the crisis to grow power. And what did we have in the 1930s?
We had the Great Depression, but really it started a little before that,
Yeah.
because you had Harding and Coolidge that were in office from
21 to
1921
29,
and then you had Herbert Hoover come in, and his policies led to the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was it just destroyed our economy. I mean,
Right.
that's what kicked off the Great Depression. But there's a little known depression that happened towards the beginning of Harding's term.
Yeah, 21,
and
22.
It was solved in 1 year. And it was as bad initially as the Great Depression, but through free market principles, they were able to turn it around. It took FDR years. It took him
Well,
most
it took
of
him
his,
a war.
It took him a war to turn it around. And there was, 7 years in, a depression within a depression because he could not get us out of it.
And I'll take it a step further. When he ran for a third term in 1940, we had 18% unemployment.
Yeah.
Yep.
18%. That's after 8 years of alphabet soup, the New Deal.
Yeah.
We had 18% unemployment. And the real point of the New Deal, and there were some true believers in it. I mean,
There were a lot of true
yeah,
believers.
I'll say that. But really what it was to take everything from local level to federal level.
Yep.
The federal government became the largest employer under Franklin Roosevelt.
Well, look at the NRA and not the National Rifle Association.
National Recovery
The
Act.
National Recovery Act, if you were a business owner and you didn't put the Blue Eagle in your window, you couldn't do business.